Hi, I'm Andrew Connell, and I'm a Microsoft MVP in the area of Microsoft 365 development. And I have a lot of experience with SharePoint development, including all of the different development models that we've had, Microsoft Graph development, Microsoft Teams development, and developing add-ins for Microsoft Office, as well as working with Microsoft Identity, including Azure AD. Task modules are modals that you can populate with either an adaptive card or an embedded web or content page for use in your custom Microsoft Teams apps user experience for workflows that require data input. Task modules allow you to gather information in Teams-aware pop-ups. In this module, you're going to learn how to create and add task modules to your Microsoft Teams app, how to invoke the task modules, and how to handle data that is submitted from them. Task modules allow you to create a modal pop-up experience in your Microsoft Teams application. Inside the pop-up, you can run your own custom HTML or JavaScript code, show an iframe-based widget such as a YouTube or a Microsoft Stream video, or display an adaptive card. They're especially useful for starting and completing tasks or displaying rich information like videos or Power BI dashboards. A pop-up experience is often more natural for users starting and completing tasks compared to a tab or a conversation-based bot experience. Task modules build on the foundation of Microsoft Teams tabs, and they're essentially a tab inside of a pop-up window. They use the same SDK, so if you've built a tab, you're already 90% of the way there, being able to create your task module. Task modules can be invoked in 3 different ways. Channels in our personal tabs will allow you to create and invoke a task module using the Microsoft Teams SDK. You can invoke the task modules from buttons, links, or menus in your tab. Creating task modules for custom Microsoft Teams tabs is covered in this section. You can also do it using a bot. A button on a card sent from your bot can invoke a task module. And this technique is useful when you don't need everyone in a channel to see what you're doing with a bot. For example, when having users respond to a poll in a channel, it is not terribly useful to see a record of all that poll data being created. Creating task modules for bots is covered in another unit within this module. Outside of Teams from a deep link, you can also create URLs that invoke a task module from anywhere using Microsoft Teams support for deep links. Let's look at the basic parts of a task module and how they're being rendered. For the first one that you see there in the number 1, that's the icon for your app. Number 2, that's your app's short name. Number 3 is the task module's title specified in the title property of the task info object that we'll see when we get to the code in a few minutes. Number 4 is the task module's close or cancel button. If the user presses this, your app's going to receive an error event that is going to be described from this box. Note, it's not currently possible to detect if this event within the task module is being invoked from a bot. We can only do this from a tab. The big blue rectangle in number 5, that's where your web page is going to appear if you're loading your own web page within using a URL property in the task info object. Now, number 6 is the entire area where your adaptive card would be rendered if you're using an adaptive card. Otherwise, you're going to need to, all of this padding is handled for you between the red and the blue box if you're using an adaptive card. If you're not using an adaptive card, you got to do that yourself. Number 7 is any adaptive card buttons will render at the bottom. If you're using your own page, you must create your own buttons. Now, task modules can be invoked from tabs, bots, or deep links, and what appears in one can be either an HTML or an adaptive card. When I say when it appears in one, I mean what appears in the task module. This implementation provides many options in how they're invoked and how to deal with the results of a user's interaction. Depending on where you are invoking the task module, the invocation is slightly different. For example, with tabs, the Microsoft Teams JavaScript SDK is how you're going to invoke them. For deep links, you're going to create a unique URL for the task module, and the details of it are going to be on the query string. And for a bot, you have to submit a special invoke message to the bot to get it to trigger the task module to open. So in this section, we're going to look at the development aspects to creating custom task modules. Task modules are similar to tabs in that they can be implemented as web pages. The task module's web page is displayed within an iframe when it's invoked. The user can dismiss the task module in one of two ways. They can select the traditional window close X in the upper right corner of the iframe, or they can select a button or a link that uses the JavaScript SDK to call the submit task method that will close the task module. Now let's look at invoking a task module from a tab. And this is done by calling the start task method in the Microsoft Teams JavaScript SDK. This method is going to accept two parameters. The first parameter is an instance of the task module info object that contains properties that define the size and contents of the task module. In the case of the task module implemented using a web page, the URL property is set to the location of the page to load in the task module. And you can also create task modules with adaptive cards. This is covered in the next section. Additional properties in the task module task info object are as follows. You've got the title property that appears below the app name to the right of the app icon. Height and width parameters, these are numbers or strings, and these properties can be a number that represents the task module's dimensions or one of the predefined sizes of small, medium, or large. The name sizes are predefined percentages of the available space to display the task module. For the width, they are for small, medium, and large goes 20%, 50%, and 60%, while the height values are 20%, 50%, and 66%. The URL is the URL of the page that is loaded as an iframe inside of the task module, and the URL's domain must be in the app's valid domains array in your app's manifest. Now that's not applicable when you deal with adaptive cards. The fallback URL, if the client doesn't support a task module feature, this is the URL that's going to be opened in the browser's tab. The second parameter of the start task method is a callback, and this contains two parameters, an error string and a result. The result can be either a string or an object. The callback is executed when there is either an error invoking the task module or when the task module submits a value back to the tab. In the case of a web page, this is done using the submit task result method in the JavaScript SDK. If an error object is passed to the callback, it will be one of the following values. Values for both the card and the URL were specified or on one or the other, but not both are allowed. And what this means is the task info object contains values for both URL and card property. These are mutually exclusive. Only one of these should be specified. Another one is you must specify a value for either card or URL. This happens when it's like the inverse of the previous one. You didn't do either a URL or a card property. Again, at least one of them is required. Exactly one of them is required. Invalid app ID, that means that the app ID you passed along is not valid. Or user canceled or closed the task module means that the user just closed the task module without completing it or submitting it. In this demo, we're going to learn the basics of working with task modules inside of Microsoft Teams, including how to collect input from users in a custom Teams tab and module. After creating a new Microsoft Teams personal tab, we're then going to add two task modules to it. Now, I've already gone ahead and created the code for this demo. If you want to see how to go about creating one from scratch, a task module from scratch, I'd encourage you to check out the lab associated with this module. Each of the three demos in this screencast that you're seeing and inside this module are all the results of running three separate hands-on lab exercises with the associated module, the module that's associated with this module, with this screencast. So what we're going to do first is that when our task module, what I want it to do is I want it to accept one of the task modules we're going to create is going to be one that's already created, is one that is going to accept the ID of a video from YouTube. And when the task module is invoked, it's going to display the video using the YouTube embedded player. So this task module is going to get the video ID from the query string, but it's not going to need to return any information back to the calling tab. Now, the other task module that we're going to create, or that has been created, is implemented using React. And it's done using the same way that we create custom tabs, the way custom tabs are implemented using the Yeoman generator for Microsoft Teams. This task module, the second one, is going to enable the user to specify the ID of a YouTube video that you want to display. And once you specify that ID, and once the ID is changed, it's going to change it inside of the tab so that when the user saves their changes, it'll use a callback to close and submit the new ID back to the tab, and you can use the first task module to display the video. So let's see this. Let's take a look at the code for this. So here inside of my manifest, again, we just have a single tab that's been defined here for our YouTube player. So there's our YouTube player that we have right here. And if I look at the tab, look at the tab, where's our tab? Inside of scripts. So here's our tab. So what we've done in our tab, let's go ahead and make it a little bit more full screen so we can see some better, is I've modified it to use the Stardust theme that you see here. So the Stardust theme is just a UX theme. So I'm also storing two things. I'm storing the theme itself that was used or that's been defined in Microsoft Teams. So either the light theme, the dark theme, or the high contrast theme. And then I'm also going to save the video ID as well. So what I'm going to do is inside when our tab gets initialized, I'm going to set the state of my tab to a default video, which is just the standard welcome to Microsoft Teams video that Microsoft recorded when Microsoft Teams was announced. And I'm then going to call a method here that's at the bottom, we'll look at that in a second, called update the Stardust theme. And I'm going to update the theme for the current tab using the theme parameter that is passed along on the query string. This is one of the things that we covered in another module, but it's something that is passed in from Microsoft Teams in our custom tab. Then, when I'm inside of Microsoft Teams, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this event handler called register on theme changed handler. And whenever the theme changes, so whenever Microsoft Teams, the JavaScript SDK detects that the theme is changed in the hosting application, we're going to call that same method that's going to go update the theme the new theme for us. So just to show you what that is doing, way down here at the very bottom, this is our update the theme. It's going to have something passed into it, the actual theme itself. If nothing is passed in, we go to the default theme, which is the light theme. And then here I'm just going to check to see if it's the default theme, then we're going to use themes.teams, which is the light theme. Otherwise, if it's dark, we're going to use the dark theme. Otherwise, we'll use the high contrast theme if it's the contrast. And then last but not least, you also just have the default. If nothing is specified, we're just going to use the default as well. And then I'm just going to change the state to use the current theme. Now, the UI for this is right here. So again, we're still looking at just a tab. We're not looking at our task module. So here I've got this provider which has the ability to know the theme and apply the theme styles to all the controls inside of it. Again, we're using the Stardust UI theme. Or Stardust UI controls. So here I'm using a flex control, got a header, some text, and then an input box that's going to show the video ID from the YouTube video when I want to display. Now it's set to disabled. I don't want somebody to change this because we're going to use our task modules to do that. And then we're going to have two buttons. So the first button is going to be to open up the task module. It's going to allow us to edit the video ID. And then the second one is going to show the video. So let's look at this show video. What does this do? Well, the show video method is going to go create a new instance of this thing called a task module info object. So this task module info object has got a couple properties to it. The only ones that we're using here is we're using a title, a URL, and then a sizing option as well. Now, the URL option that you see, this is using a URL of an HTML page. So this is just a standard HTML page that we're using to show our task module. I'm going to show you, though, in the next one, on the change video one, that we also can use a React control. And so this selector HTML is going to use a React control that works very much the exact same way as a custom tab does that is implemented using React. In a future demo, I'm going to show you how you can implement your task module using adaptive cards. So when we want to show the video, we've created this task module. I'm just going to call the start task and pass in that info object. Now, there's another option we can pass in on what happens when there's errors or callbacks. And in this case here, I'm not going to do any of that. I'm just going to pass in the information here that's going to have the ID of the video passed in on the query string. And if we take a look at what that looks like on the, what is this? This is the player HTML. All that is that this guy is going to create, so there's our div, our embedded container. And all this does is we got a function here that's going to get the video ID off the URL. And it's simply using JavaScript and the browser DOM to create a new iframe. And that iframe is going to use the YouTube embedded player to embed the video on the page. And then I'm just going to add that iframe to the embed container, to this div. And the CSS you see up here is just doing some styling to make the YouTube player look nice. Now, the other option that we had that I alluded to was being able to use this, what happens when we change the video. So this is a little bit different. When I change the video, again, I'm using the selector HTML. We'll see where that comes into play in just a minute, but notice I'm also passing in the theme. Now, this is going to use the React control. So we'll look at that in just a minute, but let's look at that now. So let's come over here and let's look at that selector. So if I look at the selector, what is this doing? This is set up the same way a tab is set up. So you see here, I've got this div of an ID equals an app. And what I'm doing is I'm saying the YouTube player.video selector task module render out into this div the object. Okay. So where is this coming from? So this YouTube task selector module, that's what this TSX file is. This is implemented just like a custom tab. So here we're using the Stardust theme. So in this case here, what I'm doing, I've got all the same stuff with the theme set up that you saw earlier. And when the in the on init, we want to make sure that what happens when when things change. But the thing I'm interested here is that I'm setting the state of setting the state of the component, which is the ID, which contains the ID of the YouTube video we want to display. Now, if I scroll down, notice here that all I have is an input and a button. And when I select that button, so when I change the value of this ID, and then when I click the update button, what's going to change here on the on click is I'm going to call Microsoft Teams.tasks. It's for a task module. I'm going to submit the task module, passing in an object. In this case here, I'm just passing in a string. You'll see in a future demo where I'm passing in an entire object. And this undefined, this extra parameter that I'm passing in here is a way that if I wanted to validate that a call comes from a specific thing. So in this case here, I'm just not doing that for simplicity. But let's see where what's happening here. So this is a callback that's being run. What I can do back in my task module, or when I invoke the task module, is here you see that when I called on my submit handler or my on change video, right here. So this is when I click that button to change the video. It's going to start the task, so it's going to launch the task module using the info that I've specified up here. But I'm going to issue a callback as well, and I'm going to say that when this task module has either errors out or when it submits, which is how you saw me do just a second ago, it is going to call this handler, pass in the result. In my case, I know it's a string, but it could be an object. And I'm simply going to set the state of the current tab, and I'm going to go change the video ID equal to the one that's been specified. So let's see what this looks like in action. So I'm going to come over here to my console and do a gulp ngrok serve. So this will spin up our local web server. Oh, and the one thing I didn't do here, so in my sample here is I have this env.ex example, but we want this to be .env. So we'll save our changes because those are our environment variables, and there's some stuff in there that we definitely want to gulp ngrok serve. There's some things in that environment variable that are used for loading and configuring our app. So I want to make sure I set that. Okay, so this is still spinning up. And now we go. So now we can see our application is now up and running. So here's our host name, and we can see our tabs. If I wanted to see everything, I could load our tabs like normal. But let's go through and let's add in. Let's go through and let's see our application. So I'm going to come over here and go log into Teams. So to teams.microsoft.com. And let's log in as an administrator, which we could log in as anybody, but I'm just going to log in as the admin. Oh, I didn't mean to do that. That's okay. And what we're going to do is we're going to install our app. So let's come over here to the ... for our personal apps. And I'm going to go to more apps and let's scroll down and let's upload a custom app. So here what we'll do is let's find our app. We'll select the zip and we'll go ahead and upload it. So here's our app. So I will select the app. And we haven't added in any of the extra stuff that we should add, like changing the picture and changing the to-dos for the short and the long description of our app, but it doesn't really matter in this case. I'm going to then select add. So it's going to go ahead and install our app. So now what it's doing is it's loading our personal tab, or our personal tab here. And you can see here that I've got the YouTube video that's been specified. And if I have our two buttons, so I have one to show the video and one to change it. So I'm going to go ahead and pick show video. And there we go. What it does is it pops open this dialog that shows the embedded YouTube player, and then I can go in and I can show this video that talks about looking at Microsoft Teams. So let's go ahead and let's open this up and let's find another video from Microsoft Teams from this same channel on YouTube. So that's a welcome to Microsoft Teams. Let's go to use the command box. So let's grab the ID of this video. Okay, so copy that. Now, what I can do is we'll go ahead and close this, our task module, and I want to show you what it looks like to change a value here. So I'm going to click change the video ID, and remember, this is our new task module that's using the React control. It's passed in the ID on the query string to this guy, and if I paste this in and then click update, what that will do is issue the callback back on my tab and update this value. So notice the value starts with X8K, and this one is QHP. Now there's QHP, and when I do show video, this is going to be our use the command box. So in this demo, what you saw was how to create and use custom task modules. One task module was just done with pure HTML, one was done with React. You can even see too how the one that we did with React and using that Stardust theme, if I change the theme for Teams to our settings, if I change it to dark theme and I change the video, you can even see here our task module got updated, right? And I can even change that back. And so you can see it pops up right back the way it was. So what's cool about this is that we can actually have the theme, our task modules can reflect the same theme. But in addition, the other nice thing about this is that it's also allowing me to, at the same time, modify the values in a task module and have that data submitted back to whatever opened it up, like a custom tab. Okay, so in the next demo, what you'll see, and we'll talk about in the next section, is how to use adaptive cards for custom task modules. In this section, you're going to learn how to use adaptive cards in a custom task module in a custom Microsoft Teams app. You're also going to learn how to invoke task modules from anywhere within Microsoft Teams using deep links. A card is a user interface container for short or related pieces of information. Cards can have multiple properties and attachments and can include buttons that can trigger card actions. Adaptive cards are a cross-product specification for various Microsoft products, including Bots, Outlook, Teams, and Windows. And they're the recommended card type for new Microsoft Teams apps. Microsoft Teams supports multiple types of cards. So let's look at how we can develop adaptive cards for Microsoft Teams task modules. An adaptive card is represented as a JSON object. The JSON string defines all the controls, text, and actions that the hosting application will use to render the card. This JSON can be authored in any text editor, the Microsoft Teams app, App Studio, and can be used to author adaptive cards, starting with a template as well as preview the rendering of the card. So this is what an adaptive card JSON looks like and what the actual rendering of that card would show up as using that image that you see there in the bottom right corner. Here's what it would look like if you were doing that exact same step using the adaptive cards design studio inside of App Studio. Using adaptive cards in task modules follows almost all the same rules as an HTML-based task module. One difference is how you create the task module. If you recall, a task module is invoked by passing a populated instance of the task info object into the start task method. For an HTML-based task module, you set the address of the web page that's loaded in the task module in the taskinfo.url property. But when you do an adaptive card, you assign the JSON of the card to the taskinfo card property. The other difference with adaptive cards is in the parameter of the callback method defined when invoking the task module with the start task method. The values of all the input controls are defined in the adaptive card. They're all returned as a single object, result, in the callback method. So you would access each one of those as a separate property. So here's what it looks like when you're using an adaptive card in a task module. So in this case here, I'm getting a reference to an adaptive card that's stored as a JSON string. I'm then going to create an instance of the task module info object and specify the adaptive card as the card property. And the submit handler, that's going to have two parameters coming in, an error object as a string and a result object. And then I'm going to define the task module and invoke it using the start task method. Now let's look at how we can invoke task modules using deep links. Task modules can be invoked using buttons and other types of user actions within Microsoft Teams. Another way to invoke a task module is using a deep link. Deep links are URLs that contain specific values that Microsoft Teams uses to invoke the task module. If you look at each one of these different values that's passed in that big URL there on the slide, the app ID is the ID of the custom Microsoft Teams app. This app ID or GUID can be found in the app's manifest.json file or manifest.xml file. Manifest.json file, sorry. The taskinfo.star properties that you see listed there, these are all the additional properties that are going to be listed in the query string of the URL, and they're all going to map to specific properties on the taskinfo object that was covered in the previous section. A deep link can be used anywhere, including conversations within Microsoft Teams channels or in external applications. In the previous demo, you saw how to create custom task modules, and we did it using just a standard HTML page, and we also did it using a React control and using the Stardust library. One of the other things that you can do with this, though, is and you may even decide that it is easier to create task modules and work with them this way, is to create them using adaptive cards. So in this demo, you're going to see how to use an adaptive card in a custom task module, in a custom Teams app, and then you're also going to see how to invoke a task module from anywhere within Microsoft Teams using deep links. So the first thing I want to show you is, let's come over to the App Studio. So let's go, we don't have App Studio installed, so let's go install App Studio. So here's App Studio. So let's go grab App Studio and install it. This is an app that Microsoft Teams makes available to developers that you can use to do a bunch of stuff, like design your manifest file. But one of the neat things you can do is they have this card editor. And what the card editor is going to allow you to do is it's going to allow you to design a card and see a preview of what it looks like. So in this case, I've got a card that I've defined, and I'm going to choose that we can use a adaptive card. So it allows me to define the card using the JSON or see what it looks like in C# or Node. But I'm able to define it, in this case here, using JSON, and then I can see what the rendering of it looks like live. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a card that I've already created, and this card is going to mirror what we did in the previous demo. So you can see we have our YouTube video selector. So if you look at the markup for this, all it is a container with a text block, so that's just what this piece is right here. Another container with another text block. But then the interesting stuff is that I've also defined in the second part of that container, I've defined an input control with an ID of the YouTube video ID. And you can see where that value is right here as I just update the value. Now, the next thing that we have is I also have an action that I've defined, which is an action of a type submit. Now, what I can do is if I copy all of this information here, I can use this in my custom task module. So let's go back over to the code, because I've already done this, and let me show you. Let's show you where I've done this. So here what I've got is, here's our custom tab that I've got. So there's our YouTube Player 1 tab. You saw this in the previous demo. But what I want to show you that's a little bit different about this is, notice that I have another button that I've created called Change the Video ID, but use the adaptive card option. So we saw how to change the video ID using the React control that we did, but let me show you how to do it with an adaptive card and how that's different. So let's go to our handler for the adaptive card. So here we go. Here's our handler for the adaptive card. So what I've done is I've taken the JSON for my adaptive card and I've saved it to a file. So here's our JSON that you just saw a moment ago. Okay, so there's our JSON. Remember, we've got this thing called the YouTube video ID as this ID for an input text. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go load in that adaptive card. And now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go update that adaptive card. I'm going to walk through all of the containers in the adaptive card. And if I find a container called a container, then I'm going to go through all of his items and I'm looking for an item that has an ID of the YouTube video ID. And when I find it, I'm going to set it equal to the video ID for the state or the video ID property from our current state, our current React state. And remember, that is the value that's showing up in our custom tab. Now, so now I have my adaptive card. Now, when I want to go create a new task module that uses that adaptive card, there's only one real change I have to do with this. And that is, instead of specifying a URL, I'm going to specify the JSON of the adaptive card. So I'm just going to set that by saying card is equal to the adaptive card. So I'm then going to start the task, passing in that object and the submit handler. And the only thing that's different about the one that you saw previously, aside from setting the URL to an actual URL, and in this case here I'm using an adaptive card, the only thing that's really different here is that I'm getting the callback is going to give me an object back. And that object is going to have all the values of all the input controls that were submitted or that were defined in that adaptive card. And so in this case here, I've got the video ID being set to the result of the video ID. And that's it. That's all I have to do. So let's take a look at how this thing works. So I'm going to come back over to my command prompt and do a gulp ngrok serve, and we'll let the application load. Now, since the last demo, I removed the old Teams app, so I'm going to have to reinstall the new app. But what you're going to see is this is going to look almost the exact same, except the UI is actually a little bit nicer. It's a little bit easier because we don't have to worry about any like styling and formatting and stuff like that. Teams takes care of all of that for us because we're using adaptive cards. Okay, so now we're up and running. So now let's come over here and let's, inside of Microsoft Teams, so upload it for Contoso, and we will use project from number 2. So now the app has been uploaded. I'm then going to go ahead and say add. So it'll install the app. And now we see we have a third button, this change video ID with an adaptive card. So remember seeing what it looked like over here. This is the one with the React one. But now to see the adaptive card one, here we can see there's our video ID. So now let's come over here and show the video. So there's the Microsoft Teams video we saw earlier. However, again, let's go find another video from Microsoft Teams. Let's see, let's go with here, and we'll scroll down to, how about overview, guide for team owners. So let's grab that video ID. And now let's come back and do, on the change video ID, we'll change it to a different value. And now when I show the video, I'm getting your go-to guide for team owners. So all that's really cool. So now you have a lot more control over what you can do with a lot more stuff that you can actually do with your custom task module using adaptive cards. Now, the next thing that we can do is we can also invoke a task module from anywhere inside or even outside of Microsoft Teams using what's called a deep link. Now, the format of a deep link, we went through it just a minute ago in the lecture, but let's create an instance of a deep link for that we want to launch this player here. So let's go grab yet another ID, another video ID from this channel, so we can make sure that we can see everything's very unique. So let's grab, let's go overview of teams and channels. So we don't need this to play right now, but what we need, we're going to want to create a custom deep link. So the way we do that, let's open up a new file here, is the URL, the format of a URL for a deep link looks like this. So we have the ID of the app, we have the URL that we want to use, the height, the width, and the title of the task module. So a couple things we already know. We already know what the URL is going to be for our stuff, which is this ngrok URL. So we need to grab this ngrok URL, and we're going to put that right here. And that was at / the YouTube player, this one right here. So we have this whole video ID. So let's grab that video ID right there. And let's use the ID that we just found. So the OJ, which is overview of teams and channels. So we'll use that right here. The height and the width, let's use the same height width we used before. So I believe the height we had was 700 and the width was 1000. And notice here, these values, like the title, the width, the height, these are all the same values that you saw. Scroll down a little bit, that you saw in the task module that you saw in the info like this. So let's see, we didn't have it wasn't the selector we were using the player. So let's do the YouTube player. So we'll copy that, put that right there, YouTube player, and we actually need to encode this. So we'll do %20 for a space. And the only thing we're missing is the app ID. So that's going to be found in our manifest. And here's our app ID. So we'll grab that. We'll paste that in right here. Cool. So now we'll grab this URL and let's go back to Microsoft Teams. And let's go into let's just go into an existing team and let's create a new conversation. And I just need to put some text in here. So let's just say like feedback. Actually, let's open up this. So say feedback requested on new video. Please let me know what you think of our new marketing video. Click here to view. So what I'll do is I will make this a hyperlink and I'll paste in our deep link like this and hit insert, go ahead and post it. Now, how do I get this to launch? Well, it's a deep link. So now if I just select this, it will launch our custom tab, and notice that when it launches our tab, it's also putting in the title of it, and it's also using the URL or the video ID that I wanted to use. So you can have a little bit more control over where these, how our custom tasks and task modules are launched. You can do this from inside of Teams. We could have it from inside of an email, all sorts of different cool little ways. So what you saw in this demo was how to create a custom, how to use adaptive cards in task modules and how to use deep links. As you've seen in other sections within this module, we've seen how to invoke task modules with from custom tabs using the JavaScript SDK, and also how we can do the exact same thing using a deep link. In this module, or in this section, what we're going to look at is how to invoke task modules from bots and how to process submissions in bots, and then how to also develop bots. So again, so far in this module, you've learned how to create task modules as HTML web pages and adaptive cards. And you've also learned how to use these task modules from tabs, as well as invoking them using Microsoft Teams support for deep links. Another way that you can use task modules is from bots. Bots present a unique challenge in that there's no user interface to interact with a bot. Rather, all comms is typically done using conversations. Now, the Microsoft's bot framework and the Teams SDKs have added support for not only invoking task modules, but also how to handle the action.submit event in the case where the task module submit information is sent back to the bot. So let's look at how to invoke task modules from a bot. Now again, recall from a previous section, the process of invoking a task module is to call the submit task method in the Microsoft Teams JavaScript SDK. And this method is not going to work when invoking a task module from a bot because the bot's code is running as a web service external to Microsoft Teams. Instead, you have two options for invoking a task module from a bot. One option is to use a deep link that is included in the message posted to the Conversations tab in a Microsoft Teams team by the bot. And when a user selects the link, it'll invoke the task module. The other option is to send a special type of message to the bot framework and therefore to Microsoft Teams. This message can be sent from a card action or from the bot itself. So let's see how this works. To create a message, set the button's type to invoke, and the value.type property of the button should be set to task/fetch or action.submit if it's a card. For example, a adaptive card. When the user selects the button, it will send an HTTP post invoke message to the bot. The Microsoft Teams SDK automatically processes all invoke messages and directs them to one of two handlers. These handlers return an object of type task module response that tells Microsoft Teams to either display a message or to display another task module. The details of the response, either a message or a task module, are included in the value property of the returned object. Now, to create a message, set the button's type to invoke. The value.type property of the button should be set to task/fetch or action.submit for cards. When the user selects the button, it will send a HTTP post invoke message to the bot. The Microsoft Teams SDK automatically processes all the invoke messages and directs them to one of two different handlers. Handle Teams task module fetch is called when the value type property of the message is task/fetch. The other one, handle Teams task module submit, is called when the value type property of the message is set to task/submit. Both these methods return an object of type task module response, and this object is going to tell Microsoft Teams to either display the message as a type/message or to display another task module type of continue. The details of the response, either a message or a task module, are included in the type property of the returned object. For example, the following response from either of the two handlers to display a message. In the previous demos, you've seen how to work with task modules, but we've triggered them in one of two ways. We've triggered them both from a custom tab, and I've also used a deep link to trigger it. But there's a third option that we have, and that is to trigger a task module from a bot. So that's what we're going to do in this demo. We're going to learn how to use a task module from a bot in Microsoft Teams. Now, before we go too far with this, the first step we have to do is to create a bot and add it to our existing Microsoft Teams app. And then we're going to extend the bot to support existing task modules to display a video and to change the selected video. So the first step is to create a bot. Now, I'm going to come over here to the browser and I'm going to go log in to my Azure portal. So go to portal.azure.com. Now, to create a custom bot, you're going to have a real Azure subscription in order to do this. So I'm going to use my Azure subscription to do this. So I'm going to go to portal.azure.com and I'm going to go ahead and log in using my Azure subscription. So what I have here is a resource group that I've created for this project called the MS Learn Teams Task Module. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to select Add, and I'm going to go find a new bot option here. So I'm going to call, this is going to be created as a bot channels registration. So I'm going to go ahead and select Create. And there's a couple of values that you're gonna need to set. So I'm gonna have a handle for my bot. This has gotta be globally unique. So we'll just call this the MS Learn Teams Task Module Bot 01, which is good. I'll use an existing subscription that I have. I'll use the existing resource group. I will stick this inside of the East US 2 option here. For the pricing option, I'm going to choose the free option of the F0 for now. And the messaging endpoint is going to be the endpoint of my ngrok URL. So one of the things I need to do is let's go see what my ngrok URL is going to end up being. So I'm going to go ahead and spin this up now. I've already created my app, so I may end up having to change this later. But we're going to go through and say gulp ngrok serve. Because this value, this URL that it gives us is dynamic unless you have a paid ngrok account. So I may have to come back and update my bot in a little bit with the URL we're about to specify. All right, so we'll just grab this URL right here and let's come back over to our app. And so I'll say the messaging endpoint is HTTP s ngrok, and then we're going to point to API/messages for our bot. And the bot registration needs to know the endpoint of where the service is implemented. I'm not going to use App Insights for this. I'm just going to leave that as is, and I'm going to let it automatically create the app ID and the password for my bot. So then I'll go ahead and select create and let it go ahead and create the bot. Okay, so we can see here that our bot has now been created. Now, one thing I have to do in order for our bot to be able to talk to teams, I need to go to the channels and I need to add in the channel for Microsoft Teams. So I'm going to select Microsoft Teams, and then I will select save, and I will agree to it and hit agree. Okay, cool. So now we got our channels set up, and if I go back to my channels page, I should see both web chat is working and Microsoft Teams is also enabled. So now if I go over here to the settings, I need to go fetch a couple of values from the settings here. So you can see I've got my endpoint that's been listed, but the important thing that I need to go grab is the ID of my bot. All right, now, so I'm going to need the ID of my bot, but another thing I'm going to also need is I'm also going to end up needing a client ID or the secret for my bot as well. So let's go over here. I click manage. It's going to take me over to Azure AD, and I'm going to create a new secret. So we'll just call this our temp secret. And here it is. So let's grab this value. I'm going to come back over here to VS Code, and let's just create a little temp folder here. So my secret is this, and the bot or the app ID is, if I go to overview, is this value. And the last thing we have is our bot handle. And that is, if I go back over here to my bot, there's our endpoint. Come up here and let's get our bot handle, which is this value right here. Okay, now we have all of our values that are set here. So now I need to go modify a couple values in our environment variable settings, just to configure things for development. So in this .env, I need to set the app ID equal to this. I need to specify the secret equal to the secret that we have here. So there we go. Those two are now set. And at this point, the bot's now been registered with the bot service. So the next step is to go ahead and to implement the bot. Now, I had already done this ahead of time. And in the lab, you walk through and do this as well in the lab itself. So if I come over here inside of the in my project and I look at the manifest, what you're going to find is I've registered a bot. And so if I scroll down here, I have a bot. There is an ID for my bot. All right, now I need this bot ID. I need to go grab that from that value that I had a second ago. So this 6e should be this value right here. All right, so that's the actual bot ID. And notice here I've specified that it's only going to show up in the personal scope, and right here the command list shows in a personal scope, and it's only got one command called mention me. And I'm going to use this just to make sure that the bot is working. Now I've gone ahead and I've modified my project as I show in the lab to install the latest version of the bot framework v4 SDK. If I come over here into the app, you will see that I have my learning bot right here as this TypeScript file. So what does this do? So inside of the constructor, I have a handler here of an on message. And what this is going to do, what this on message is going to do is it's going to check to see if what the message is that's been passed in. So in this case here, if it's a mention me, then I'm just going to call this mention activity. And so if I look for where mention activity is defined, that's down here. I'm simply just going to write out that where the activity came from. I'm going to write out some text, and the type of it is just a mention. That's just this mention object. So I'm going to have a message factory, which is something that you get from the SDK. So the text I'm going to write out is hi, whoever was that, hi, this at mention of whoever actually sent the message. I'm then going to set the entities equal to the array of all the mentions that have been passed in. So I'm just passing this one in, and then I'm going to send it back to Microsoft Teams, to the SDK, or to the bot, and the bot's going to communicate with the Microsoft Teams SDK to pass that information in. Now, by default, the other one that we have here is this default section. So what happens otherwise? And in this case, what I'm doing here is I've created another card. Okay, what this is that this what I'm doing here is I've got a couple different invoke different types that have been set up here for a new hero card that has been defined. So I have a card here called Learn Microsoft Teams, and you can watch the overview of Microsoft Teams. You can watch the go-to guide. You can watch an invalid action, so something that's not a valid video ID, or I can watch a specific video. And in this case here, notice that I want to open up a task module called selector. I can open up the player, which you saw from previous demos. I can open up an invalid task module, or I can open up a task module called selector. And here I'm also passing in a specific video ID. So what I'm doing with this is I'm going to then go send the activity back. If the bot is invoked and it's not a mention me, it's anything else, it'll trigger this hero card. And what these different invoke activities are going to do is they're special, and they're going to send this type of a task fetch back over to the bot framework. Now, the bot framework and Microsoft Teams know how to talk to each other, as I talked about in the slides or in the lecture just a second ago. And what this part's going to do here is that there's this method called handle Teams task module fetch. And what this is going to do is that when it sees that invoke operation happen, it's going to call this overridden method. It's going to pass in a context with a request object, and I need to give it back a task module response. So here I'm checking to see, of the data that was passed in, did you ask for the player task module or for the selector one? And what I need to return is I need to create this response, and the response is just a response of that task info object. So here the continue simply means, okay, just show the task module. So again, I'm doing it here for this player, I'm doing it for a second player, or for the selector, doing the same kind of thing. But when these are task fetches, and what that means is it's just going to show a task module. I need to figure out what happens also, though, when it's not just a fetch, but when the task module does a submit. And the submit handler is going to be sent not to a tab like I showed you in previous demos, but instead in this case, the submit has to go back to the bot. And in that case, I need to handle the response. So that response that comes back to me, I'm going to get this request coming back, and I'm going to get that any object that contains all the properties that were in that other task module. And again, here you notice I'm still using the adaptive card thing to go grab the adaptive card and all of that stuff. All right, so we have our web server up and running using the ngrok serve gulp task. And what that's serving up again is it's a web server, and that's hosting or serving up the requests for our task modules, which are just standard web pages. However, we also have the one that is a adaptive card that's not being served up by our web server. And then we also have our custom tab that it's hosting that we are using. But then for this demo, what I really want to show you is the bot. And so we've already registered the bot with Microsoft Azure and connected it to Teams or enabled the Teams channel. And you saw how we did that already. But this is also hosting the API endpoint at the API/messages endpoint for our bot as well. So the first step is going to be to deploy our app. So I'm going to go to teams.microsoft.com, and I'm going to go ahead and log in as an administrator. So we'll go to admin. That's not the user I want to use. Actually, let's switch off of this, and let's go incognito, and let's go to teams.microsoft.com, and we'll log in as an administrator into our tenant. And I'll grab the password and log in. And no, we don't want to stay signed in. Now this first thing we want to do here is I just want to install the app, but I'm going to log in as a different user to use the app. So what I'm going to do is come over here, and we're going to go to More Apps, and I'm going to upload a custom app for Contoso. So we'll upload our YouTube player, Microsoft Teams custom app. And we will go ahead and add it. All right, great. So it's now been installed, and we'll just go ahead and use this. We could go through and create log in as a different user to use this, but this will work just fine. So as you see here, the first thing that I get back in the chat experience is that when I defined the bot, I said that here in the personal experience, which is where we are right now. So you can see I've got my personal app, and I'm on the YouTube player. This is the tab, the custom tab that we saw from previous demos. But in the chat experience here, I said in the chat bot that it had one of the commands that it understood was a mention me. And so what I can do is if I submit the mention me, what it should do is it will respond back and say who the current person was that just mentioned the bot. And so because it knows that the message came from me, it was able to get my name and write back and say, hi, mod administrator. But if you recall from our bot, we also said that if a different message came in, which was anything other than the mention me command, then I wanted to also allow it to respond back with a hero card. And the hero card had a bunch of buttons on it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say just help. I really can type anything in, but I'm going to say help. And what that's going to do is respond back. Our service is going to respond back to the bot framework in Azure, which knows how to communicate to Microsoft Teams, and is going to send back a hero card with these 4 buttons on them. So if you recall, we have one that is using a adaptive card, and then we have other ones that are using just the player and the selector HTML page. So here I've got these are for the player. So if you recall, we can specify specific things that we're passing in. I was passing in an ID. So if I click this button, what's going to happen is it's going to submit that task fetch invoke command back to our bot. And our bot is going to then be able to send back a task info object back to the bot framework in my registered bot in Microsoft Azure as a bot channel. And then that's going to be able to communicate with Teams to tell it, go launch this task module, which you can see here. I have this task module that I can use. The other thing, I can launch a different one. So you can see I can specify a different image here. So I hit the go-to guide, and sure enough, I get the go-to guide that shows up. I also have an invalid one, which was going to use a default video. And so if I click the invalid one, this is an invalid video that was being sent to it. And so I'm just sending the one that, because it didn't have a valid image or a valid video that was specified, it's just going to default to the YouTube player. But then the last button, this is the one that had my adaptive card. And what this one was, this is the one that, if you recall, is going to open up a dialog for me to specify the ID of a video that I want to watch. And so here, let's go grab the ID of a video. So let's open this up, open up the existing one, and we'll start playing it. I'll jump over to YouTube, And let's go find on this YouTube channel, let's go to Microsoft Teams, and we'll scroll down and let's find a video that we haven't used yet. How about create and format a post? How's that? So we'll grab that one. So we'll grab this ID, copy that, and we'll go back over to our player. But now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna watch a specific video. Now, if you recall, what this does is this sends a task module that has my adaptive card that's gonna open up a dialog here that's also gonna be able to specify the default value. I'm gonna use the video that I just specified. So this is using the experience where it needs to get the data submitted back to the caller. And in a tab, when I was doing this with a custom tab, I was having the information sent back to me using the JavaScript SDK. But I can't do that with the bot. Instead, what's going to happen is that this task module is going to submit the data back to the bot framework, which is going to send an invoke command back to our bot API that is running on my local machine. And furthermore, it's going to allow me to harvest the data out of it, which I'm then going to use to send back another video. So here's my custom video. So when I click update, that's going to send the command back to my bot, which goes to my API, which is then going to send the message right back to the bot framework, which goes back to Microsoft Teams, which says launch the player task module. And this is the video that I specified that I wanted to show. And then I can go ahead and close it. So it's pretty cool. You've seen here in this demo how to create a bot, a very simple bot, mind you. But we've created a bot that was then going to be able to communicate with the bot channels in the bot framework, and that is then going to communicate with Microsoft Teams to trigger task modules to appear, and also to have that go back to our web app. In this module, you learned about task modules and how we can create them and invoke them and handle the data that's submitted back to them, both from a Microsoft Teams tab, and also invoking them from a deep link and using them from bots. I hope you got a lot out of this module and learned a little bit about task modules with Microsoft Teams and how to use them in your custom Teams apps.